Great. So hi, everyone. Welcome to Tips from a Former Grantmaker, a live proposal review with Shavonn Richardson. I am really excited for this today. I want it to be interactive. I have a little poll that I want to start us off with just so we can get our interactive juices flowing here. So go ahead and look at that as I'm kind of walking us through some housekeeping. Give me your thoughts. Tell me what you think about grants, right? All right, so first things first, this is being recorded and we will send you the replay afterwards. So definitely keep your eyes open for a follow-up email from me in case you want to review anything today, or maybe want to send this to a colleague or a friend to get some of that greater insight. I know that there will likely be questions that come up. We will try to get to as many as we can. Feel free to drop those in the chat throughout. Just use that 3 hashtags in front of your questions so that I can find them. There's always a lot of chatter that goes on in these chats, and I don't want to miss your question. So if it is your first time here, I am Celia. I'm with Instrumentl, and this is a free grant workshop through our Instrumentl Partner Webinar series. So these are collaborations between us and Instrumentl and our partners like Shavonn to provide free educational workshops for grant professionals and nonprofits. So our goal with these workshops is very much similar to our goal as an organization. And really that is to support grant writers and nonprofits with tools and insights that they need to find more funding while doing less work, right? Isn't that always going to be the goal? So what does that mean? Well, Instrumentl brings grant prospecting, tracking, and management all under one roof. And that results in saving about 3 hours a week. Our users typically save about 3 hours a week on their grant process, while increasing their grant output by as much as 78% in the first year. So we're really kind of helping people do that. You know, on Instrumentl, you're going to find over 12,000 active opportunities. If it's on there, it's active. So there's no more of the sleuthing around. You find a great opportunity, you find out they haven't actually accepted a proposal in 5 years, right? And then once you set up your search, we're going to continue working for you in the background. So this is like a personal assistant in your pocket. You set it up, you go back and do, one of the other 15 jobs that you have to do. And this is going to be working for you in the background, finding good fit funders from you, and then emailing them to you once a week. So you don't miss anything. You don't miss any deadlines. You don't miss any new opportunities, right? Beyond that, our platform is helping teams to collaborate better with one another, and also to collect and keep a library and a record of everything they've done. So with our document collection tools, you can take that proposal template that maybe you're gonna hone in today after you listen to Shavonn give her kind of tips. You can drop that into Instrumentl, and then you will always have access to that in the future. So I am going to drop a link in the chat really quick for Shavonn's link if you want to try 14 days free. Anita, I'm going to message you separately. Yeah, and then thanks everyone who participated in our poll. Really interesting responses here. What grant proposal characteristic would you say is most important when applying for grants? We've got a pretty close tie here between a clear focus and tailored specifically to the funder. So that's really interesting. And then which of the following do you think is most important step in the process of becoming a grant writer? Overwhelmingly, I'm not surprised, gaining real grant writing experience. So glad to see it. Thank you for participating. And with all that housekeeping out of the way, I want to go ahead and introduce stop my share here. Introduce our awesome Shavonn, who is going to give us a really good insight today. And I couldn't honestly think of a better person to do this with today, because Shavonn has reviewed countless sponsorship and grant proposals as a former corporate foundation grant maker. During that time, she supported Bank of America's corporate social responsibility initiatives for the Atlanta metro area. She helped distribute over 1.5 million annually to local nonprofits. She's also served as a federal grant reviewer for HRSA and other federal agencies. Shavonn has also earned the GPC Grant Professional Certified Credential. Wow, I cannot talk today. credential from Grant Professionals Certification Institute. She is a Grant Professional Association approved trainer, and she serves on the board of directors for the GPA, the Grant Professional Association. So Shavonn, I'm so excited to have your perspective today. Thank you so much for joining us. I am going to hand it over to you and let you kind of take the reins here.
Well, awesome. I'm super excited to be here. I'm always just like shy and embarrassed when my bio is read, because I feel like, I've done so much, right? As far as just contributing to the grant professionals industry and just, working as a former grant maker, which kind of informed my career path, actually. It was really good experience to see what foundations look for, being in the room, listening to those conversations. And so today, the goal is to really bring all that insight and experience to you guys, right? Like to share it, because I feel like it's really, really meaningful information to know. So thank you, Celia, for that wonderful introduction. I'm super excited to be here, super excited to connect with everyone. I know a lot of people talked about kind of like, wanting to learn more about budgets and learning more about supporting clients that are not quite grant ready. I feel like there's so much to talk about on both those topics. So I feel like Celia, like future workshops, I feel inspired by those potential topics to share in future workshops for sure. So like, who's Shavonn, right? All these things, all those wonderful things that Celia read for me. I personally, I'm obsessed with red wine, vintage albums, and yoga. I am an absolute yogi. That's what I love to do. I got my undergraduate degree at Howard. We're currently having our homecoming, so everyone's so excited about that. I got my MBA from Emory. I do live in Atlanta, Georgia, and our firm is based in Atlanta, Georgia as well. So that's a little bit about me and my role, right? Like, what do I do? I am founder and CEO of Thinking Grant Consulting. We were founded in 2016. We are headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. We really pride ourselves in providing customized, real-world solutions to help nonprofits think through grant-seeking strategies before inking competitive proposals. We feel like sometimes, as you all know, we have a lot of consultants in the room. Nonprofit leaders are just more apt to just write grants, right? They just want to write grants to get it out there. But really taking a step back and really thinking through an effective grant-seeking strategy is what I always recommend. At our firm, we use Instrumentl to help our clients do that, right? So what makes us kind of unique, right, is that we specialize in supporting nonprofits that help women, children, health, and education. We do that because we feel like those are the most vulnerable members of our society. And by focusing on those 4 areas, we can really move the needle to changing the world. So learn more by visiting our website. We have our QR code there as well. So you can kind of check us out and my team there. We have a team all across the country. We have clients all across the country. Just really excited to just support all the wonderful things our clients do. So let's get into the start of our workshop. So I love a good story time, right? And I know people love a good story time. So I wanted to really start with a story time, just 3 kind of examples of things I've seen kind of working at Bank of America Foundation as a program manager and also serving as a federal reviewer. I feel like it's going to kind of put everything into context as far as what we'll be talking about today. And so just to start, right, I want to really share a little bit about the best proposal I ever reviewed, right? And for context, this proposal was a federal proposal. I came across this working as a federal reviewer, and this particular proposal actually scored 100 points, a perfect score across all 4 of us as reviewers. And what made it so good is that how well organized and structured it was. So as a reviewer, I was literally reading through the rubric, assigning points, and I was looking at the proposal, and they were addressing everything as they went. So they made it super easy for me to score their proposal. And that's why I deemed them as like the best proposal that I ever reviewed. It was super easy. We didn't have a lot of kind of back and forth on that. And so, yeah, that's just an example of one, the best proposal I've ever received. The best cultivation strategy I've ever seen deployed was during my time at Bank of America Foundation. And, you know, a lot of times like nonprofit leaders will send emails and they'll send, you know, follow-ups to conversations and all that. But the best cultivation strategy that I really liked is one nonprofit sent in a handwritten note from one of the children that they support. I believe it was written in crayon. Actually, it was the cutest thing, written in crayon, and it had like a picture of that child kind of like engaging in some of the activities that nonprofit did. And that was the best cultivation strategy because I never forgot it. And I actually kept like the handwritten note and the picture on my wall in my office. And I never forgot that. So it kind of stayed in my mind. And then another really popular way too was the fact that it arrived via mail on my desk. You know, I came in and it was like this envelope on my desk and I'm like, wow, who mails stuff anymore, right? Most people email. So to receive something via mail was kind of unique too. So it stood out kind of in the sea of emails and phone calls and all that stuff. And I never forgot that. So that to me was like the best cultivation strategy that I've ever seen deployed. And the worst proposal I ever received, that was also a federal proposal. It was laced with errors and all types of misformatting and a lot of things that did not make sense. It was kind of like, you can tell they were kind of like putting it together the night before. Very difficult to read, kind of no ideas kind of really tied to one another. And so that wasn't scored favorably either. And that was the worst proposal I ever reviewed. And funny enough, the best and the worst proposal were in the same funding cycle. So literally I got like that best proposal. I said, wow, this is great. And the worst proposal, I'm like, okay, this is what it is. Okay. So that was just a quick story time before we move on to the next part of what we're going to discuss today. So if you don't take anything away from this workshop, about a lot of different things, but the one primary thing I want you to take away from our time today is to make your proposal easy for the reviewer to review. That is really the basis of everything we're going to talk about today. So our agenda kind of breaks down what that looks like, but it all leads to making it easy for the reviewer to review. If it's easy for the reviewer to review, they will more likely score your proposal higher. They will see kind of like the train of your thinking, and it'll make it easier. There's nothing more than having to look at a proposal and kind of like shift through different pages, trying to find different sections of a rubric, right? You're supposed to meet the requirements of the rubric, and no one wants to do that. It's very difficult to do that. So first part of our agenda, we're going to learn to set your proposal up for success even before you start writing, right? This is the thinking part, right? Like the strategy part before you start writing. The second piece is to how to make your next proposal more competitive. So this part will be all about kind of tips and things to do to make sure that your proposal is competitive. The third thing is to how to avoid common mistakes many nonprofits make. So this is based on kind of the same things that I see over and over again as common mistakes. I want to make sure that you don't make those mistakes or make those mistakes for your clients. And lastly, we want to learn how to structure your proposal to maximize the points earned in each section. So at the end of the day, it's really about maximizing points. You will hear me use the word points. That's more specifically for federal grant writing, but in overall, when we're talking about foundations, we're also talking about kind of like making sure what you're writing appeals to what they do. Each foundation has a different internal evaluation process. Some may evaluate by points, some may not. But at the end of the day, it's really about just making sure that you are presenting the best information possible, whether it's a federal grant or whether it's a foundation grant. So I want you to absorb what you'll be learning in today's workshop, just kind of with that lens. Okay. So we're going to go through these step by step. There will be a pause for everyone to ask questions. So if you don't mind holding your questions to the end, that would be great. So the first thing, setting your proposal up for success. I have already shared that our firm uses Instrumentl. It's a reason for that. Instrumentl is very convenient. as far as not having to look at like multiple places to do research. It's all in one place. My team and I have saved countless hours using Instrumentl. It's our go-to place that we go, and we use it for multiple other reasons as well. So our first point of using Instrumentl to find aligned funders, when you go there and you're putting in kind of the details of your programming as far as finding or not details of your program, but like your focus area, like what you do, right? So if you help those experiencing homelessness, or if you help women or children or education, K through 12, right? You can pick that, and then you can also kind of narrow it down to funders that are more aligned to what you're looking for. You don't really want to ever focus on applying to like a sea of funders, right? You really want to narrow that list down as much as possible. It will save your time, and it will also save the funders time, and it will allow you the capacity to compose a competitive application and also build relationships, which is highly key. So it's really about using Instrumentl to find just a small set of funders that are really, really well aligned with your work and focusing on those funders. The second bullet is cultivating a relationship with the funder before submitting an application. I know there's some funders that don't require this. There's some others that do require it. There's some others that like you to cultivate a relationship, although they don't even say it, right? And so I always say, at least if there's an opportunity, try to cultivate the relationship. The good thing about Instrumentl, there is a contact information page that does have, any publicly available information of a funder available that you can reach out to. And so, when I've looked at it, I've found, emails and phone numbers and different things. So always kind of suggest reaching out to a funder, making sure your program is aligned with their focus areas, and making sure that you can have a conversation with them, right? And maybe pitch your idea before you go through the hassle of doing a full proposal. So that's always good. Another thing, and this is kind of like the strategy, right? Like setting your proposal up for success. Sometimes we get those questions and there's so many thoughts going through our mind as far as how to approach those questions. I would say before you even start writing, start by bullet pointing what you want to say in each section. This will help you not repeat things in different sections and provide valuable insight into each section, and also kind of like cherry pick the most important points that you want to make, especially when we have word limits and character limits. Your proposal is precious real estate. So you don't want to waste time or energy or space kind of talking about things that don't directly answer the question. But when you bullet point exactly the points that you're trying to make, that will kind of help you be very, very focused on what you want to say in each section. The second part of setting your proposal up for success, this is specifically about federal grants. And so let's say if you have a federal grant, and a lot of times they may have like a 10-page max, right? And then separately, you will find a rubric where they'll say, this section is worth 10 points. This section is worth 15 points. This section is worth 25 points. But oftentimes, especially if you're a newer grant writer, they don't give guidance as far as like how much to discuss a certain section or not, right? And so my guidance when it comes to that is to use a weighted average approach. And so if there's a specific section that's worth 25 points out of a total 100 points, that's 25% of the points going to that one section. So if 25% of the points is going to that one section, you want to make sure that 25% of your real estate, and that is the pages in the proposal, is dedicated to that one section. So in a 10-page proposal, you want to make sure that it is at least, as you're addressing that section, using at least 2.5 pages to address that section that's worth 25%, and keep doing that for each section, so that way you have a well-balanced proposal and that you're sufficiently meeting whatever the funder is looking for. So I'm going to take a break and ask to see if there's any questions specifically about kind of setting your proposal for success, given kind of the 4 things that we talked about here.
Yeah, we definitely have some questions. So one question we got was, is it okay to ask for a rubric from a grant reviewer, or is there a way to create a rubric from the proposal guidelines?
Is this for federal or for nations?
Good question.
I could answer both. If it's for a federal grant, the rubric most often is already included in the RFP. I think sometimes people may just read like the programming and eligibility and they stop. But if you keep reading, sometimes they'll have evaluation, and then they'll either bullet point the things that they're using to evaluate your proposal, or have an outright rubric that says this is worth 25%. And that is the same rubric that reviewers use to evaluate your proposal. So the answer to the federal grant side is it's included. Foundations, sometimes it is not as clear, but they do communicate like their preferences, right? Like we prefer it to address this, and this. You'll rarely get like a very like insider information as far as how they're going to actually review your proposal, but most of them do have kind of preferences of things that they would like to see within their proposal. And you want to make sure you meet all of those.
Got it. Another question was, how can you make it easier for the reviewer if you have to answer each question specifically? Questions sent from the Fed or the foundation.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that in the next few slides.
Cool. Got it. Another one was, what about funders who don't want you to reach out before submitting? I know this one comes up all the time. How can we best cultivate that relationship?
Yeah, well, for those that don't want you to reach out, usually the way to get in is through an LOI, a letter of interest, and submitting it that way, and that starts the dialogue.
Great. We actually have a great on-demand video if you guys want to check it out on LOIs on our blog. So check that out. We have, let's see. We had a question. Did you give feedback on your proposals so that when they didn't win, so that they could improve?
As a federal reviewer, that's not always possible.
Yeah.
But there's a process that you can go through to request like a copy of the reviewer's comments. So it's not direct, but you can get it in writing. As a employee at the Bank of America Foundation, you know, corporate, right? There's a liability there, right? As far as giving feedback. So my heart of hearts wanted to give feedback, but you know, we weren't always in a position to do so. So just know that if you don't get the feedback, don't take it personally. Sometimes people just can't, right? Like rules and regulations and legally, they're just not allowed to give feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. Last question, and I think we'll move to the next section here is, what is the best way to conduct a follow-up after a denial?
Yeah, well, you know, I always encourage clients, and we help our clients do this, create a follow-up template, email template, just, you know, thanking them for the opportunity, maybe asking for feedback on their proposal in writing. Sometimes you can't get a meeting to get feedback. If you are, definitely consider yourself blessed to be able to get someone to schedule time to give you feedback on our application that's been declined. But definitely just, you know, a really well-crafted email, thanking them, asking for any insight, input on future programming, and potentially saying, you know, we may reapply in the future, especially if you're giving some guidance as far as, you know, what you can do to improve. And always keep it really open and friendly, because you never know when you need to submit another application, and you may need to just follow up on emails even years after. So yeah, that's what I would do.
I know I said last one, but really quick, this is a great question. Someone asked, is it more important to use the majority of the, like should you fill the word amount allotted, or should you try to say what you need to say in less words?
Oh, I was talking about this with one of my employees the other day, and my take on this may not be a popular opinion, but it's my opinion. I would say use the space that's needed to say what you have to say.
Okay.
So if you can get to it quickly, get to it. But if there's additional space, there is opportunity to maybe, you know, expand or kind of just like add some additional things. So just for example, if you have a question and they're asking about like income, outcomes and metrics, like how are you going to measure it, right? So answer the question. These are our outcomes, boom, boom, boom. This is how we're going to measure it. And if there's some extra room, you can also say, you know, take the opportunity to say, you know, these are some of the questions that we're going to ask when we're measuring it. This is kind of how we plan on evaluating our program as well. I'm giving you extra, right? I answered the question, but I'm also giving you extra. This is how we plan on evaluating the program. This is what our evaluation plan looks like. Here are the partners that we want to gauge as far as evaluating. And then when we're done doing all that work, we plan to share the results with you. I think it's just the icing on the cake if you do have some spare room.
Got it. Okay, there are more, but I think let's hop into it. And then if we have time at the end, we'll run through some of these. Cool.
Awesome. Okay, so our next part is making your proposal more competitive. There's a lot here, so I'm going to get through it as quickly as possible. Always speak in the present tense. The present tense communicates impact. It is what we're doing now. I'm going to add this, it's not on the slide, but avoid that language that says, you can say we will do or we plan to do, but sometimes I feel like proposals are written kind of like, it's obvious that you're not doing the work, right? And so just, avoiding that type of language, have, confident language, impactful language. This is what we're proposing to do, and always speak in the present tense. Write in the V formation. So you guys are like, what are you talking about, Shavonn, write in the V formation? So this is something that I've kind of coined to kind of best explain the way we approach grant writing, right? So a V starts very kind of, wide and open, right? And it provides, when you're writing, you're oftentimes providing context, or you're kind of setting the stage to what you want to talk about later on. Sometimes proposal questions are written like this. Oftentimes not, but if you have a free form opportunity to talk about something, a lot of times it's good to kind of open up with like, about your organization, right? Very, very high level, potentially talking about, some of your, general programming, or talking about some of your wins and successes, right? Things like that, right? But then as you kind of get to the bottom of your proposal, you want to make sure that, you're getting from this high context, but you're kind of narrowing down and getting really specific about what you want to do. And so when I say the V formation, just making sure that's consistent. You don't want to start talking about the organization up here, and then you start talking about your program, and you start talking about metrics, and then you start talking about your organization again. You have to kind of like lead a person and walk them through kind of very high level, because they're reading multiple proposals, right? And they don't know you, right? So you have to set that context and that background to tell them who you are, right? And you kind of walk them down into specifically what you want to do. So that is super important. And another thing that's not on here that I will add is that you can also save space, right? So if you are writing a grant proposal and the name of the organization is, We Love Dogs or whatever, you could always open up saying We Love Dogs, and then putting, WLD in parentheses, and refer to WLD throughout the rest of the proposal. That does save space. It does save character. So that's just another tip I want to throw in there. On the same line as space, effectively using space to separate ideas. Oftentimes I'd find like run-on paragraphs, people talking, and it's just like no break, right? It just runs. And so making sure that you were like separating paragraphs, and that separation of a paragraph is kind of like a breath, right? And a transition to another thought. Now, this point is not as effective on some federal grant applications. Like, I'm trying to think of an example. Some of the SAMHSA grant applications, it is common to like not have any spacing, right? And have full paragraphs of just a whole long section, right? In that case, which is a point that's coming down, you would use like bolds and italics and underline to separate and reinforce certain ideas. But the spacing is definitely important when you're writing for foundations that don't have those online submission blocks to separate ideas and avoid kind of run-on paragraphs. Also, bullets are powerful. Use some avoid fluff and quickly communicate ideas. And so what I call bullets as like dropping receipts, right? So if you're answering a question, you're answering it, and then you can say, hey, this is how we're going to do this. boom, boom, boom. You have bullets, kind of hard-hitting bullets. This is what we're going to do. And your bullets are just straight to the point that after the reader reads it, it's like, how can I say no? Like, they drop so many receipts to explain exactly what they're doing. I can't say no, because they just build on this one point after the other, just kind of really clearly communicating what they're wanting to do. So I like bullets as applicable. Sometimes you can't always do bullets in those online forums, but when you can, they're really good. Like I mentioned before, using bold, italics, and underline to reinforce major ideas. One of the winning grants that we did, and this was a federal grant, we did goal number 1 was in bold. And then we talked about the goal. Goal number 2 was in bold, and then we talked about the goal. And we did that again to help the reviewer kind of like understand the separation of what was going on, and they could clearly zoom in on what was important. Use concise language, right? Like, growing communities sounds better than communities that are growing. That will save you word count, character count, and all of that. If you use any type of like Grammarly or anything like that, sometimes they'll catch that, but just be mindful of that when you're writing. It communicates a little bit clearer when you speak in that way. And okay, I'll stop to take questions. I know that was a lot before we move on to the next part of our agenda item.
All right, we will do maybe like a lightning round here. Cool. So you're talking regularly about federal grants. Are most of these suggestions applicable to foundations as well, private foundations?
Yeah, it's both. I wanted to make sure that you all had some exposure to both. So as I'm going, I'm specifically highlighting things that are more applicable to federal versus foundations.
Okay, got it. What if the application sections are in the wrong order for you to make your case, or like sort of tell that story?
I know, do the best you can.
Is it better to write in first person or third person?
Oh, it really depends. I prefer third person, but you know what I say? Whatever you choose, be consistent. That is the key thing. Don't start in third person and then forget you're writing in third person, all of a sudden flip to first person.
Got it. Someone said, I'm old school and learned to apply white space. Is that still applicable?
White space to separate paragraphs?
I don't really know. Maybe you can give us, Cheryl, you can give us a little bit of extra information there.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of it.
Okay.
Cool. We'll keep working on that. Cheryl, let us know what you think, and we'll see if we can answer that question.
Yeah, happy to answer it. All right. So moving on to like the third part of our agenda, avoiding common mistakes. Again, this is the stuff that I've seen, right? That I don't want you all, or when you're advising your clients to make these mistakes. So, sometimes there could be blind spots or things that aren't really clear. And as human beings, our brains are kind of programmed to fill in missing information because you're the one writing it. So although it's not on the paper, your brain will fill in the information to make it make sense, right? But that's why you have like a third party read it, because they don't have that going on. So a third party is an outside person to just have them read it and to make sure that it makes sense, and they can ask questions, right? Like clarification questions, and they'll give you an opportunity to go back and make some corrections. So like that third party person is kind of like how a reviewer would be reading it. So definitely have like a third party person that is not associated with the program do that. And you can kind of spot any missing things. I'm laughing because I see a missing thing on our slide. So the second point is to avoid spelling and grammatical errors. So making sure that you're running like any spell check, or like, Grammarly is really good too, to make sure that, everything is kind of, on par. Avoid run-on sentences. So sometimes it's easier to have two simple sentences than one run-on sentence. So don't be afraid to break a run-on sentence into two sentences, because it'll be easier for the reader to digest. They'll read the first sentence, they can digest that. And then you have the second sentence, which is continuing the first sentence, and they can digest that. It comes across very clear when you do it that way. Know this, and I don't know how many people know this, numbers 0 through 9 are written in words. And so if you're saying 1 or 2 or 3 in writing, it's written in words. Anything 10 and up is you can actually write as a number. So that is maybe some old school grammatical thing, but it's something that I learned, years ago. And it's something that's like, grammatical standards that I don't know if everyone is aware of that. So I want to make sure that that's shared. Another thing is to make sure you're using consistent font and font color. I know often we do a lot of cutting and pasting, and sometimes we may not be paying attention, especially if it's like a dark gray. Sometimes when you cut and paste dark gray, it looks very similar to black, and you don't even realize the difference. When I look at it, I always realize the difference because my mind is just trained to review. And so make sure that the font colors are all the same. If you're doing all black, do black font, not like light gray or anything like that. And also be consistent with the font. Again, when we're copying and pasting, sometimes you might paste Arial instead of Times New Roman, and sometimes it might be 11.5 versus 12, right? And your eyes may not catch it, but just making sure that you're going through the whole thing, making sure that all the font and the font colors are consistent. Be really careful when using links. This is specifically when we're talking about federal grants, more specifically. Sometimes reviewers are not allowed to click on those links, and they're not allowed to see any information that's outside of the proposal. It has to be in the proposal. So it's okay to use links if you have like a footnote, right? And you're including the link in the footnote for reference so that they know that there's a source to it. But sometimes they can't click on the links, and sometimes those links take up a lot of room in the proposal, and you're wasting space because they can't click on it, right? And then other times they have to print out the proposal and review it, especially about, and this is more applicable for foundations, right? A lot of times it's a bunch of people in the room and someone is handing out a printed copy of a proposal and everyone's reading the proposal together. It's not being accessed on a computer. So you don't know how it'll be reviewed. So to be safe, just avoiding the links is a good thing, because you don't want to like lose points because you thought that a person was able to see a link and they can't. Okay. Last bullet on this slide is to use parallel language and structure. So sometimes, like, I'll start with the bullets ones. Sometimes people will have bullets that some of the bullets have periods and some of them don't. Whatever you choose to do, because there's different opinions on this, whether you choose to use periods or not, just make sure it's consistent, right? Just don't do periods for a few bullets and none for other bullets, right? So that's really what I'm talking about, like parallel, consistent structure. And parallel language is if you're, saying that we serve the community and are growing whatever and are distributing whatever, you want to make sure it's consistent. If everything's supposed to end in INGs, it should all end in INGs. Don't have like serve and then supporting and developing as different parallel languages. So that's another thing to be mindful of. Okay, I can stop and take questions there on avoiding common mistakes.
Let's see. I think we had run-on sentences. What do you think about that?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Avoid them.
I got it.
Just simple sentences, breaking into 2 sentences if you can.
Cool. Struggling with word limits. Can you use 1 through 9 as numbers rather than words?
I wouldn't.
Okay.
You can.
Got it.
There's a lot of things you can do. I just wouldn't.
This is not totally related, but to your slide, but currently writing a proposal to ask for project goals and then for steps will take to achieve those goals. Are steps equivalent to objectives, and should they be SMART?
Oh my, I love this question. This is another workshop. So goals, so objectives are the specific steps that you're going to take to accomplish a goal. I have heard the word SMART objectives. However, I prefer the term SMART outcomes, which is very different. That's another workshop, I'm sure, and I don't want to take away time today explaining that, but I prefer SMART outcomes versus SMART objectives.
Got it. Okay. I know there's tons of questions, but let's keep moving because we got a lot to do.
Yes, a lot to cover. Okay, so the last thing is, I'm looking at the time, wow. The last thing is how to structure your proposal to maximize points. So I might have said this before. So like order your responses in the same order as a rubric. When I was talking about like that proposal that I loved, it makes it very easy to follow along. And also use the language from the rubric within your responses. I recently had one of my employees serve as a reviewer, and she came back and she was like, and I asked her, so what was the biggest thing that you learned? She said, the biggest thing that I learned is to use the language from the rubric. Because when I saw people doing that, it made it easy for me to review it. I'm like, good, that's what you were supposed to learn. So just to provide an example, let's say if the question is, what challenges did you encounter? You can open your response and say, whatever your organization name is, right? XYZ organization encountered the following challenges. So if you're doing it bullet pointed, then, that would be the lead in. But if you're not, just kind of like opening up using the funder's language. So that way, when the reviewer reads it, they're like, oh, I know what question they're answering. They're answering this question. And then if you open up with another response, then the reviewer will know, oh, they're transitioning to this next part. So you have to speak and kind of like use words to help the reviewer transition to the next part. So that is what's key as far as that part. This is Grant Writer 101. Fully address the 5 W's and the H. What is that, right? Another Shavonn-ism, right? The 5 W's are the who, what, where, why, and the H would be the how of your proposal. You want to write a proposal in a way that the reviewer has no questions. They fully understand everything that you're wanting to do. You have left no stone unturned. And when they read it, they understand exactly what you're doing. Now, in the case of foundation proposals, sometimes, like I mentioned before, it's a group of reviewers reviewing your proposal. And I hate to say it, sometimes there's like a devil advocate in the room, right? Like they always have to like shred a proposal apart, like, well, they didn't address this or they didn't address that. And you never know how that person's opinion may sway the group. So you always want to write to the devil's advocate in the room, where it's like, I don't care who's in the room, like no one can question this proposal. Like we have addressed everything fully, and there's nothing more to be explained. The only question that you want to hear is, when are they going to send the check, and when are you going to get the grant agreement signed and back to them? That's the only question you want them to have after reading your proposal. The next thing is answer the question the funder is asking. Oh my gosh, we used to see people kind of like, I don't know if they didn't have a response, so they just provided some fluff, but address the question that they're asking. If they're asking you about sustainability, don't talk about something else, right? Address the question, right? And if you can't address the question, then that's kind of like another conversation, right? Like your organization needs to do some kind of thinking and some strategizing around common questions that are coming up that you're not able to answer. You need to really think about what that could be. And the last thing here is to fully answer each part of the question. This applies to both foundation and federal grants, but it really is important as far as federal grants, right? So the example is explain the impacts of your programming on stakeholders, beneficiaries, and the greater society. Those are 3 things that you want to make sure that you address. You don't want to address stakeholders and you have nothing to say for the other 2, and you think you can just continue on, right? No, that's not going to work. You need to sufficiently address each part of what they're asking. And this is important, like I said, for both foundation and federal proposals, but especially with federal proposals, because no matter how well you address stakeholders, if you didn't address stakeholders, beneficiaries, and the greater society, you may not get points for that question. And that's how, folks are trained to grade this. So super important that you fully answer each part of the question. All right, so before we look at a real proposal, I will stop and I will see if anyone has questions about what we've talked about so far.
There's so many. We might have to follow up with like a follow-up Q&A.
Oh my gosh.
For the proposal, should you start each section by reiterating the question or just answer the question?
Just answer the question.
Just answer the question. Stories make super impact. Often proposals don't allow for stories. How do you work around that and still leave an impact?
Can you repeat the question?
So essentially, like, stories are really impactful, but sometimes either the character length or whatever doesn't allow for you to like tell a full story. Like, how would you work around that to still leave an impact?
You need to provide a testimonial or one or two sentence testimonial.
Okay. Okay, cool. I think that's it. Melissa had a question about first or third person, and I think you already answered that. You could do either, just be consistent.
Yes. Awesome. So we are going to review a proposal that came in, and the person that submitted this proposal is in this workshop. So I want to give Marianne an opportunity to, number one, share a little bit about your organization, and number two, kind of give us some context and some background about how you came across this opportunity, what are some of the things that you all did to prepare for this opportunity, and anything else that you feel would be helpful.
Okay. ACLANET is an organization that was founded about 8 or 9 years ago. And its mission is to decrease injuries, deaths, and property damage from lightning across Africa, because there's a lot more lightning in Africa, and there are almost no safe places for people to go like there are here in the United States. We're the only organization in the world that is doing this. There is now one in South Asia with 8 countries in the network that took our bylaws and changed the name, and one Latin America Lightning Network, who's about 2 months old. And we work very closely together. So I don't mean that in any kind of snarky way. We all work together and support each other. So the problem is I can't go to any other organization and see who their funders are, because there are no other organizations like this. Secondly, by the number one risk, the people who are most vulnerable are students, because the schools in Africa are small structures of 1, 2, 3 classroom blocks. They're not protected. You have 50 kids per classroom, sometimes as many as 70 or 80 per classroom in the ones that I visited about a month ago. And lightning hits the building, and we had 18 children killed in one lightning strike back in 2011. So, however, there are no keywords for lightning injury prevention or even injury prevention. If we try to go under community, and the reviewers are specialists in what they do. There's no question about that. And I respect them tremendously. The problem is they don't look at things the same way we do. So if I say it's education because we want to make the kids feel safe enough to stay in the school and learn instead of scatter and run home, which is what they've been taught to do when dark clouds come over. It's not how to teach math better in the 7th grade. If we're community development, no, they're interested in water and, whatever, technology applications. If we say we're a disaster, they're interested in COVID response, not disaster prevention. So it's really, really, really hard for us to find any kind of fit for the kinds of things that we do. And most of the foundations and grants are for United States. Let's face it, for food pantries, pet shelters, not for Africa. So this was an organization, and I have to confess, I wrote this about 18 months ago, so I have not reviewed it a lot. This was an organization that it was almost like one of those prizes that you can compete for, but it was general support for organizations that are fulfilling their mission and doing something special. So that's why we applied for these folks. It wasn't a specific, how are you going to get immunizations to 3-year-olds?
Got it. Well,
we don't fit under anything that Gates does. So don't say apply to Gates, because Gates has nothing to do with anything we do.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank Marianne for submitting this proposal and for being so brave. And so we're going to go through the review, but I want us to look at this review from the standpoint of just trying to do the best we can, right? And dealing with a lot of the obstacles that Marianne explained, right? So we're going to look at it with grace and through that lens. So really high level, because we have 9 minutes. Okay. So really high level, I made some comments in here, and Marianne, hopefully you'll have that, right? And so some of it I already touched on, and so I won't go too deep into that. But this was highlighted really using funder language in the response, right, as a recommendation, right? A lot of these other things are things that I've already kind of mentioned about. Oxford comma, that's another thing. People have very passionate opinions about whether to use the Oxford comma or not. I'm for it, but whatever you decide to use, be consistent. So another thing that I kind of came across, so here was using some past tense language. Sometimes when you're writing, this is specifically for federal grants, you can't help but use some past tense language. Even in foundation grants, when you're talking about what your organization has done, you have to use past tense language, right? But as we get kind of like talking about impacts and your programming, we want to make sure we keep it active, right? Some of this was, I added a few words, right, that I felt like would be good to clarify. This is another part here about kind of like using consistent language, right? That's very, very key. Forgive some of these changes you see here. That's not necessarily a spelling error, but we had to convert it from a PDF, and so it does not convert over perfectly. So, for this purpose, just kindly ignore that for now. So this is kind of what I was talking about, like using links. And Marianne, I do understand you included the link for research, right? And to maybe give some additional resources to the reader. Sometimes foundations will allow you, and federal grants will allow you to create like a resource page, or they may say, hey, is there anything else you'd like to include or share with us? You can put that there as well as some additional resources. Not to say they can or will read it, but it just shows that you did your due diligence. Kind of going through this a little bit more quickly. So this is the part where we're starting to answer the real questions, right? And they're asking about kind of like challenges or opportunities, right? But I just found reading it, I could not, you were giving us context of the problem, right? But the question specifically asked about what challenge, opportunity, or situation are you seeking to address? And so I would have probably gotten right to it, and you don't have to, and the word or is there, so you don't have to address all three, but you would address either challenge, opportunity, or the situation. But I probably would have started addressing it further up, right? So that way you're getting right to what the reader is looking for. There are a few other changes here too. I think one thing that is really key here is that like the approach to like safety was through public and professional education and other things, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. It's always good that when you're listing things like that, and then you're coming down and actually doing a 1, 2, 3, to actually present it in the same order that you listed it above. So I was expecting in my review of mine that this first bullet be, public and professional education, right? And then the next thing being protection of schools. And so when I got here, my mind was a little thrown off because that's what I was expecting, but I didn't get it. So that is just a tip that is really, really good. This one sentence was great in it. I love that you all kind of communicated what was going on, and you use numbers, which is interesting because it communicates scope. So 33 of the 55 countries in Africa. There's some others here. I feel like I'm running out of time, but when they're talking about outcomes, stick with outcomes that are actually measurable, right? Because when you do your reporting later, you're going to have to report out on like measurable things. And sometimes like public service announcements and media coverage, there are ways that they can be measurable, but you have to make sure you just kind of communicate it. Two run-on sentences here, recommendations splitting into two. And we are unfortunately out of time. So I will stop there. And Celia, I will kind of transition back to the deck so that way we can
I don't know what your schedule looks like. If you have an extra couple minutes, we can keep it going. I know you're a busy lady though. So if not, we can also just kind of wrap it up. But you can keep going. And even if you have to hop off right at the top of the hour, I'll wrap everything up.
Okay. Well, I don't believe I have any meetings after this. I feel like I blocked myself off, but I will double check to make sure that we're good, and I'm happy to continue.
Well, we can go an extra maybe like 10
okay.
minutes.
Okay, cool.
And then if anybody does have to hop off, just a reminder, we will be sending you the recording. So if you do have to hop off, you can just zoom through to the very end and catch the last little bit here. But also, as I do that, I am just going to share the sign up link if anybody's interested in checking out Instrumentl before you go. That is Shavonn's link. And with that code, you'll save $50, which is great. And the other thing was our freebie. We've got a couple of things today for you from Shavonn and from Instrumentl. So check that out as well. I just dropped that in the chat. So, and then I will be quiet and let you.
Well, thank you. Yes, definitely sign up on my link and get $50 off for Instrumentl, which I highly recommend you check it out. If you have not checked it out, or if never tried it, or want to do the two-week free trial, check it out. Use my link. Here's more about my website and my team. We're passionate about our work. Love it. And feel free to also connect with me on LinkedIn. Here's my QR code to my LinkedIn profile. So if you want to connect that way, you can as well. And I'm happy to take some questions.
Awesome. Cool. Let's grab some of these questions then. Someone asked, sorry, I got to zoom back here in this, in this, here we go. Lots of questions. Okay, here we go. Some of these are questions, some of these are just statements. So, should you number the questions in each section when answering?
Number the questions.
Or should you like write it? I think the question is like, should it be like question 1 answer, question 2 answer, or should it be like a sort of a, story?
I would stick to a narrative approach as much as possible.
Okay, cool, got it. Just sort of trying to find a couple questions in here. This is a great question. I think this is probably a different webinar potentially, but what if your superiors don't agree with certain protocols and best practices when they incorporate them? Tell them Shavonn told you what to do.
Yeah, that'll work. You mean as far as your programs?
I think as far as like some of the best practices you gave on how to write. So like some of that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this time Shavonn said it was okay. I'm kidding. It's hard. It's hard. I understand where you are with that, and I understand internal approval processes. Everything I've shared is, I learned it, right? I either read it in a book, I have mentors, right? Like it's out there. So I think like the 0 through 9 thing, if you do a Google search, it's there, right? You can present it like this is a real thing. Like I'm not making this up. And then after that, I mean, I don't know what you can do, but just know that, everything that's shared today is, for lack of a better term, evidence-based.
Yeah, that's great. We had a question on fonts. Any fonts that you like or think are like easier to read than others?
Oh, this is such a cool question. So I never even thought about this, but I'm thinking about it now. I tend to like Times New Roman for federal grants. I'm just old school like that with federal. And then I like Arial for foundations. So that's a great question. Never thought of it.
Yeah. Let's see. We had a question that's kind of interesting. what's with the arbitrary character counts that grant makers determine? Do you think we can ever get to a place where every application agrees what is reasonable length to complete standard questions?
Hopefully.
Got it. Cool. And then the other question, and I'm curious what you think about this, is do you think grant writing should incorporate advocacy into our work in order to make the entire process more equitable? So that's sort of following along the question of these arbitrary character counts. And
yeah, so I will say to that, that's a definitely a broad industry question. But one thing I could share is I serve on the Funders Equity Committee for the Georgia Grant Professionals Association. And a lot of our local work is working with foundations to talk about those things and more, especially in the areas of diversity and equity and inclusion. So I know these conversations are happening. We can all do, what we can to try to influence these conversations. And I know kind of in my little bubble of Georgia, we're trying to have those conversations. So it's a great question.
Cool. And then someone wanted to know, there's a couple questions about you, I think, too. How do you become a federal grant reviewer?
It takes time.
Yeah.
It took me years. I just started by getting my resume out in every registry and updating it often, and then eventually people started calling. Know that these grant reviewer opportunities, they like to have a diverse group of folks. So some of them are subject matter experts, some of them are regular old folks, right? Some of them are grant writers, some of them, so they like to have a lot of different folks. And so when you're filling out your background, right, just keep that in mind that you bring something to the table. So just share kind of like all your background and your experience and different things you've done, and they just basically kind of look through them and follow up. But it took years.
Yeah. People want to see the 100% proposal that you mentioned.
I can't share it.
Sorry,
because I'm down, but as a federal reviewer, I can't share it, can't mention it. No names, no nothing. But I was blown away. It was so beautiful.
Awesome. Anita, who is also, I think, in Georgia or in Atlanta, wanted to know how she could get information on the organization that you serve on in Georgia for grant writers.
So I am a member of the Grant Professionals Association National. And I serve on the board for the Grant Professionals Association. And shameless plug, our GPA conference is taking place the 1st through the 4th. Instrumentl is a sponsor, right? Celia, you guys are a sponsor.
We'll be there. We'll be at GPA.
Oh, exhibitor?
Yeah. I think sponsored. I don't know.
Sponsor,
we'll be
maybe?
there. We have a booth. Come see us.
Okay, good. Yep. Instrumentl will be there. They have a booth. My firm, Thinking and Grant Consulting, will be there. We'll have a booth. We're exhibitors this year. And I'll also be speaking about logic model live. So it's very similar to this, but I'm actually walking folks through like a live logic model, and we have to solve a problem in the community. It's in person only. So if you're not going, I'm sorry. There'll be other opportunities. And so I say all that to say that's all like national stuff. But then locally, we have each local chapter has their own chapter. So if you're in Idaho, or if you're in New York, or wherever you are, you have a local GPA chapter that you can join and engage in. So since I'm in Georgia, I'm also a member of the Georgia Grant Professionals Association chapter. And within our chapter, we developed that committee to do that important work. Now that committee is not in every chapter. It's just something we decided to do on our own.
Cool. That's
so
awesome.
If you're interested, hit me up on LinkedIn and we'll get you connected.
Awesome. Anita, hit her up on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Nancy had a question really quickly on Instrumentl in the 14 days. That is full access to our standard plan, which has a couple sort of extra fun features. So you can try that out for 14 days free, set up a project. You'll get your own list of custom good fit funders that you can use now. You can export them and use them later. And if you decide that you love it, you can use Shavonn's code Shavonn50 to save $50 if and when you decide to subscribe. So let's see. I think that was kind of it on questions. So this is probably a good place to wrap it up.
Oh my goodness. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Is there another slide? Oh, Celia.
No worries. That's our freebies. So we've got a couple of things for you today. The first thing is an awesome, I think it's a chapter, right, from your kind of book, Shavonn, that we're offering here, how to design and fundraise a nonprofit program.
How to design a fundable nonprofit program. So it's about designing before you write. Make sure that you have everything in order before you write.
So you get that, and then you'll also get our 10 lessons from 10 grant writing experts in there too. All you got to do is put in your information. You don't even have to do anything. And then after the fact, if you're like, I know someone who needs to come to one of these webinars, we've got a button that makes it really easy for you to invite your friends to the next event. So hopefully you'll be there. So I dropped that in the chat. The freebies link is in the chat, and we will follow up with an email here soon with a replay and with the links for the freebies, the links to sign up for Instrumentl, Shavonn's code, all the stuff that you might need to get going here. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Thanks, Shavonn. We appreciate your time.
You're welcome. You guys take care.
Bye, everyone.
Alrighty, bye.